everyone, welcome back to Reads with Room B with me, Room B, and
Robert.
my partner in War Crimes for our read of Oliver. We are doing chapters 24 and 25 today. Chapter 24 treats of a very poor subject, but a short one, and may be found of some importance in this history. It was no unfit messenger of death that had disturbed the quiet matron's room. Her body was bent by age, her limbs trembled with palsy, her face, distorted into a tumbling leer, resembled more the grotesque shaping of some wild pencil than the work of nature's hand. Alas, how few of nature's faces are left to gladden us with their beauty! The cares and sorrows and hungerings of the world change them as they change hearts, and it is only when those passions sleep and have lost their hold forever that the troubled clouds pass off and leave heaven's surface clear. It is a common thing for the countenance of the dead, even fixed in rigid state, to subside into that long-forgotten expression of sleeping infancy, and settle into the look of very early life. So calm and peaceful do they grow again, that those who know them in their happy childhood kneel by the coffin's side in awe, and see the angel even upon the earth.
The old crone tottered along the passages and up the stairs, muttering some indistinct answers to the chidlings of her companion, and being at length compelled to pause for breath, gave the light into her hand, and remained behind to follow, as she muttered, while the more nimble superior made her way to the room where the sick woman lay.
It was a bare garret room with a dim light burning at the far end. There was another old woman watching by the bed, and the parish apothecary's apprentice was standing by the fire, making a toothpick out of a quill.
"Cold night, Mrs. Corney,"
said the young gentleman as the matron entered.
"Very cold indeed, sir,"
replied the mistress in her most civil tones, and dropped a curtsy as she spoke.
"You should get better coals out for your contractors," said
the apothecary's deputy, breaking the lump on top of the fire with a rusty poker.
"These are not all. It's not all of the sort of thing for a cold night."
"They're the board's choosing, sir," returned the matron. "The least they could do would be to keep us pretty warm, for our places are hard enough."
The conversation was here interrupted by a moan from a sick woman.
"Oh,"
said the young man, turning his face towards the bed as if he had previously quite forgot the patient.
"It's all UP here, Miss Corney."
Is it, sir?"
asked the matron.
If she lasts a couple of hours, I shall be surprised,"
said the apothecary's apprentice, intent upon the toothpick's point.
It's a break-up of the system altogether. Is she dozing, old lady?"
The attendant stooped over the bed to ascertain, and nodded in the affirmative.
"Then perhaps she'll go off in that way, if you don't make a row,"
said the young man.
"Put the light on the floor, she won't see it there."
The attendant did as she was told, shaking her head meanwhile, as to imitate the woman would not die so easily. Having done so, she resumed her seat by the side of the other nurse, who by this time had returned. The mistress, with an expression of impatience, wrapped herself in her shawl, and sat at the foot of the bed.
The apothecary's apprentice, having completed the manufacture of the toothpick, planted himself in front of the fire and made good use of it for 10 minutes or so, when apparently growing rather dull, he wished Mrs. Corney joy of her job, and took himself off on tiptoe.
When they sat in silence for some time, the two old women rose from the bed, and crouching over the fire, held their withered hands out to catch the heat. The flame threw ghastly light on their shriveled faces, and made their ugliness appear perfectly terrible, as in this position they began to converse in a low voice.
"Did she say any more, Annie, dear, while I was gone?"
inquired the messenger.
"Not a word.
replied the other.
She plucked and tore at her arms for a little time, but I held her hands and she soon dropped off. She hadn't much strength in her, so I easily kept her quiet. I ain't so weak for an old woman, although I'm on parish allowance, no.
Did she drink the hot wine like the doctor said she was to have?
I
Demanded.
demanded the first,
I tried to get it down,
rejoined the other.
but her teeth were tightly set, and she clenched the mug so hard that it was as much as I could do to get it back again. So I drank it, and it did me good.
Looking curiously around to ascertain that she was not overheard, the two hags cowered nearer to the fire and chuckled heartily,
I mind the time
said the first speaker.
when she would have done the same, and made rare fun of it afterwards,
Aye, that she would.
rejoined the other.
She had a merry heart and many beautiful corpses she laid out as nice.
As nice and neat as waxwork. My old eyes seen them, and these old hands touched them too, for I have helped her scores of times.
Stretching forth her trembling fingers as she spoke, the old creature shook them exultingly before her face and fumbled in her pockets, brought out an old-timey discoloured tin snuff box from which she brought out an old-time shook a few grains into the outstretched palm of her companion, and a few more into her own. While they were thus employed, the matron, who had been impatiently watching until the dying woman should awake from her stupor, joined them by the fire, and sharply asked how long was she to wait.
Not long, mistress,
replied the second woman, looking up at her face.
We none of us have long to wait for death. Patience, patience. He'll soon be here enough for all of us,
Hold your tongue, you doting idiot.
said the matron sternly.
You, Martha, tell me, has she been in this way before?
Often,
Answered the first woman.
but will never be again.
Added the second one.
That is, she'll never wake again but once, and mind, mistress, that won't be for long.
Long or short?
The matron said snappishly.
She won't find me here when when she does wake. And take care, both of you. How you worry me again.
For nothing.
For nothing. It is part of my duties to see old women in the house die. I won't. That's more mind that. You impudent old harridans. If you make a fool of me again, I'll soon cure you. I warrant you.
She was bouncing away when a cry from the two women who had turned towards the bed caused her to look around. The patient raised herself upright and was stretching her arms towards them.
Who's that?
She cried in a hollow voice.
Hush, hush.
Said one of the women, stooping over her.
Lie down, lie down,
I'll never lie down again alive,
said the woman, struggling.
I will tell her. Come here, let me whisper into her ear.
She clutched the matron by the arm, and forcing her into a chair by the bedside, was about to speak when, looking around, she caught sight of the two old women bending forward in the attitude of eager listeners.
Turn them away,
said the woman drowsily.
Make haste, make haste.
The two old crones, chiming in together, began pouring out many piteous lamentations that the poor dear was too far gone to know her best friends, and were uttering sundry protestations that they would never leave her when the superior pushed them from the room, closed the door, and returned to the bedside on being excluded. The old ladies changed their tone and cried through the keyhole that old Sally was drunk, which indeed was not unlikely, since in addition to the moderate dose of opium prescribed by the apothecary, she was labouring under the effect of a final taste of gin and water, which had been privately administered in the openness of their hearts by the worthy old ladies themselves.
Now listen to me,
Said the dying woman aloud, as if making a great effort to revive one latent spark of energy.
In this very room, this very bed, I once nursed a pretty young creature that was brought into this house with her feet cut up and bruised with walking, and all soiled with dust and blood. She gave birth to a boy and died. Let me think. What was that year again?
Never mind the year.
The impatient auditor said.
What about her?
I
murmured the sick woman, relapsing into her former drowsy state.
What about her? What? What about? I know,
she cried, jumping fiercely from her face flushed and her eyes staring from her head.
I robbed her, so I did. She wasn't cold, I tell you. She wasn't cold when I stole it.
Stole what? For God's sakes,
cried the matron with a gesture as if she could call for help.
It,
replied the woman, laying her arms over the other's mouth.
The only thing she had, she wanted clothes to keep warm and food to eat, but she had kept it safe, and I had it in her bosom. It was gold, I tell you, rich gold that might have saved her life.
Gold?
Echoed the matron, bending eagerly over the woman as she fell back.
Go on then. Yes. What of it? Who was the mother? When was it?
She charged me to keep it safe,
replied the woman with a groan,
and trusted me as the only woman about her. I stole it into my heart when she first showed it to me, hanging around her neck, and the child's death perhaps is on my besides. They would have treated him better if they knew him all along.
Known what?
Asked the other.
Speak.
The boy grew so like his mother,
said the woman, rambling on, not heeding the question,
that I could never forget it when I saw his face. Poor girl, she was so young too, such a gentle lamb. Wait, there's more to tell. I have not told you all I have.
No,
replied the matron, inclining her head to catch the words as they came more faintly from the woman's dying.
Be quick, or it may be too late.
The mother,
said the woman, making a more violent effort than before.
The mother, when the pains of death first came upon her, whispered in my ear that if her baby was born alive and thrived, the day might come when it would not feel so much disgraced to hear its poor young mother's name.
Oh, kind heaven, she said,
folding her thin hands together.
Whether it be a boy or girl, raise up some friends for it in this troubled world, and take pity upon the lonely, desolate child, abandoned to its mercies.
The boy's name?
Demanded matron.
They called him Oliver,
replied the woman feebly.
The gold I stole was...
Yes, what?
She was bending eagerly over the woman to hear her reply, but drew back instinctively as she once again rose slowly and stiffly into the sitting posture, then clutched at the covertly with both hands, muttered some indistinct sound in her throat, and fell lifeless on the bed.
Stone dead,
said one of the old women, hurrying in as soon as the door was opened.
And nothing to tell after all,
rejoined the matron, walking carelessly away.
The two crones, to all appearances, too busily occupied in preparation of their dreadful duties to make reply, were left alone, hovering about the body. And now we are on to chapter 25, wherein this history refers to Mr. Fagin and company.
While these things were passing in the country workhouse, Mr. Fagin sat in the old den, the same from which Oliver had been removed by the girl, brooding over the dull, smoky fire. He held a pair of bellows upon his knee, with which he had apparently been endeavouring to rouse it into more cheerful action, but he had fallen into deep thought, and with his arms folded on them, and his chin resting on his thumbs, fixed his eyes abstractly on the rusty bars.
At the table behind them sat the Artful Dodger, Master Charlie Bates, and Mr. Chitling, all intent upon a game of whist. The Artful taking the dummy against Mr. Bates and Mr. Chitling. The countenance of the first-named gentleman, particularly intelligent at all times, acquired great additional interest from his close observance of the game and his attentive perusal of Mr. Chitling's hand, upon which, from time to time, as occasion served, he bestowed a variety of earnest glances, wisely regulating his own play by the result of his observations upon his neighbour's cards. It was, being a cold night, the Dodger wore his hat. Indeed, it was often his custom within doors. He also sustained a clay pipe between his teeth, which he only removed for a brief space when he deemed it necessary to apply refreshment from a quart pot upon the table, which stood ready filled with gin and water for the accommodation of the company.
Master Bates was also attentive to the play, but being of a more excitable nature than his accomplished friend, it was more observable that he more frequently applied himself to the gin and water, and moreover indulged in many jests of irrelevant remarks, all highly unbecoming a scientific rubber. Indeed, the Artful, presuming upon their close attachment, more than overtook occasion to reason gravely with his companion upon these improprieties, all of which remonstrated Master Bates receiving an extremely good part, merely requesting his friends to be blowed or inserted his head in a sack, or applying with some other neatly turned witticisms of similar kind, and a happy application of which excited considerably admiration.
Admiration.
I hate these long words.
Admiration in the mind of Mr. Chitling. It was remarkable that the latter gentleman and his partner invariably lost, and that the circumstance, so far from angering Master Bates, appeared to afford him the highest amusement, inasmuch as he laughed most uproariously at the end of every deal, and protested he had never seen such a jolly game in all his born days.
That the two doubles and the rub,
said Mr. Chitling, with a very long face, as he drew half a crown from his pocket waistcoat.
I never seen such a fellow as you, Jack. You win everything, even when we've good cards. Charlie and I can't make nothing of 'em.
Either the matter or the manner of this remark, which was made very ruefully, delighted Charlie Bates so much that his consequent shout of laughter roused the Jew from his reverie, and induced him to inquire what was the matter.
Matter, Fagin?
Cried Charlie.
I wish you had watched the play. Tommy Chitling hasn't won a point, and I went partners with him against the Artful and the Dumb.
Aye,
said the Jew with a grin, which sufficiently demonstrated that he was not lost to understand the reason.
Try him again, Tom, try him again.
No more of it for me, thank ye, Fagin,
replied Mr. Chitling.
I've had enough. That here Dodger has such a run of luck that there's no standing him again.
Ha ha, my dear,
replied the Jew.
You must get up very early in the morning to win against the Dodger.
Morning,
said Charlie Bates.
You must put your boots on overnight, and have a telescope at each eye and an opera glass between your shoulders, if you want to come over him.
Mr. Dawkins received these handsome compliments with as much philosophy, and offered to cut the gentleman in company for the picture card at $1 a time. Nobody accepted this challenge, his pipe being all but smoked out by this. He proceeded to amuse himself by sketching a ground plan of Newgate Prison on the table, with a piece of chalk which had served him in lieu of counters, whistling meantime with peculiar sharpness.
"How precious dull are you, Tommy?"
said the Dodger, stopping short when there had been a long silence and addressing Mr. Chitlin.
"What do you think he's thinking of, Fagin?"
"How should I know, my dear?"
replied the Jew, looking around as he plied the bellows.
"About his losses, maybe, or the little retirement in the country that he's just left, eh? Ha ha, is that it, my dear?"
"Not a bit of it,"
replied the Dodger, stopping the subject of the discourse as Mr. Chitlin was about to reply.
"Should I say?"
What
do you say, Charlie?"
"I should say,"
replied Master Bates with a grin,
that he was uncommon sweet upon Betsy. See how he's a blushing. Oh my eye, there's a merry rounder. Tommy Chitlin's in love. Oh Fagin, what a spree!"
Thoroughly overpowered with the note of Mr. Chitling being the victim of the tender passion, Master Bates threw himself back in his chair with such a violence that he lost his balance and pitched over upon the floor, where
the accident abating nothing of his merriment.
He lay at the full length until his laugh was over, when he resumed his former position and began another.
"Never mind him, my dear,"
said the Jew, winking at Mr. Dawkins and giving Master Bates a reproving tap with the nozzle of the bellow.
"Betsy's a fine girl. Stick up to her, Tom. Stick up to her."
"What I mean to say, Fagin,"
replied Mr. Chitlin, very red in the face,
"it's that isn't anything to anybody here."
"No more it is,"
replied the Jew.
"Charlie will talk. Don't mind him, my dear. Don't mind him. Betsy's a fine girl. Do as she bids you, Tom, and you will make your fortune."
So I do as she bids me,"
replied Mr. Chitlin.
I should have been milled if it had been for her advice. But I turned out a good job for you, didn't it, Fagin? And what's 6 weeks of it? It must come some or another. And why not the winter time when you don't want to go out for a walk or much, eh, Fagin?
"Ah, to be sure, my dear,"
replied the Jew.
"You wouldn't mind it again, Tom, would you?"
asked the Dodger, winking upon Charlie and the Jew.
"If Bet was all right,"
"I mean to say that I shouldn't,"
replied Tom angrily.
"There now, who'll say as much as I should know about eh, Fagin?"
"Nobody, my dear,"
replied the Jew.
"Not a soul, Tom. I don't know one of 'em would do it besides you. Not one of 'em, my dear."
"I might have got clear off of it. I'd spit upon her, might I, Fagin?"
Angrily pursued
Angrily,
the half-witted dupe.
"A word from me would have done it, wouldn't it, Fagin?"
"To be sure, my dear, it would."
replied the Jew.
"But I didn't blab it, did I, Fagin?"
demanded Tom, pouring question upon question with great volubility.
No, to be sure,"
replied the Jew.
"You were too stout-hearted for that. A deal too stout, my dear,"
"Perhaps I was,"
Tom rejoined, looking round.
"and if I was, what to laugh at it that a Fagin?"
The Jew, perceiving Mr. Chitlin was considerably roused, hastened to assure him that nobody was laughing, and to prove the gravity of the company, appealed to Master Bates, the principal offender. But unfortunately, Charlie, in opening his mouth to reply that he was never more serious in his life, was unable to prevent the escape of such a violent roar that the amused Mr. Chitling, without any preliminary ceremonies, rushed across the room and aimed a blow at the offender, who, being skilful at evading pursuit, ducked to avoid it, and chose his time so well that it lighted on the chest of the merry old gentleman, and caused him to stagger into the wall, where he stood panting for breath, while Mr. Chitling looked on in intense dismay.
"Ha!"
cried the Dodger at this moment.
"I hear the tinkerer.
Catching up the light, he crept softly up the stairs. The bell was rung again with some impatience, while the party were in darkness. After a short pause, the Dodger reappeared and whispered mysteriously to Fagin.
"What?"
cried the Jew.
"Alone?"
The Dodger nodded in the affirmative, shading the flame of the candle with his hand, and gave Charlie Bates a private intimation in his dumb show that he had better not be funny just then. Having performed this friendly office, he fixed his eyes on the Jew's face and waited his directions.
The old man bit his yellow fingers and meditated for some seconds, his face working with agitation, and while as if he dreaded something and feared to know the worst. At length he raised his head.
"Where is he?"
he asked. The Dodger pointed to the floor above and made a gesture as if to leave the room.
"Yes,"
said the Jew, answering the muted inquiry.
"Bring him down. Hush. Quiet, Charlie. Gently, Tom. Scarce.
This brief direction to Charlie Bates and his recent antagonist was softly and immediately obeyed. There was no sound for their whereabouts when the Dodger descended the stairs, bearing a light in his hand, and followed by a man in a coarse smock frock, who
After casting a hurried glance around the room, pulled off a large wrapper which concealed the lower portion of his face and disclosed, all haggard and unwashed, unshorn, the features of Flash Toby Crackit.
How are you, Faggy?"
said this worthy, nodding to the Jew.
"Pop that shawl away in my cash, the Dodger, so that I may know where to find it when I cut. That's the time of the day. You'll be fine, young cracksman for the old file now."
With these words, he pulled up the smock frock and, winding it round his middle, drew his chair to the fire and placed his feet upon the hob.
"See there, Faggy,"
he said, pointing disconsolately to the tops of his boots.
"Not a drop of the day and Martin.
Since you know when, not a bubble of blackening by. And don't look at me in that way, man. All in good time. I can't talk about business till I've eaten and drank. So produce the sustenance. Let's have a quiet fill out for the first time in these 3 days."
The Jew motioned to the Dodger to place the eatables there were upon the table, and seated himself opposite the housebreaker, waited his leisure.
To judge appearances, Toby was by no means in a hurry to open the conversation. At first the Jew contented himself patiently watching his countenance, as if to gain from its expression some clue to the intelligence he brought. But in vain. He looked tired and worn, but there was some complacent repose in his features that they always wore. Through the dirt and the beard and the whiskers were still shorn and unimpaired. The self-satisfied smirk of Flash Toby Crackit. When the Jew, in agony of impatience, watched every morsel he put into his mouth, pacing up and down the room. Meanwhile, in irrepressible excitement, it was of no use. Toby continued to eat with the utmost outward indifference until he could eat no more, and then, ordering the Dodger out, he closed the door, mixed a glass of spirits and water, and composed himself for talking.
"First and foremost, Faggy,"
said Toby.
Yes,
interposed the Jew, drawing up his chair. Mr. Crackit stopped to take a draught of the spirits and water, and to declare that the gin was excellent, and then placing his feet against the low mantelpiece, so as to bring his boots about the level of his eyes, resumed quietly.
"First and foremost, Faggy,"
said the housebreaker.
"How's Bill?"
"What?"
screamed the Jew, starting from his seat.
"Why, you don't mean to say—"
began Toby, turning pale.
"Mean?"
cried the Jew, stamping furiously on the ground.
"Where are they? Sykes and the boy. Where are they? Where have they been? Where are they hiding? Why have they not been here?"
"The crack failed,"
said Toby faintly.
"I know it,"
replied the Jew, tearing the newspaper from his pocket and pointing to it.
"What more?"
"They fired and hit the boy. We cut over the fields at the back with him between us, straight as the crow flies, through hedge and ditch. They gave chase. Damn me, the whole country was awake, and the dogs upon us."
"The boy?"
gasped the Jew.
Bill had him on his back and scuttled like the wind. We stopped to take him between us. His head hung down, and he was cold. They were close upon our heels, every man for himself, and each from the gallows. We parted company and left the youngster lying in a ditch, alive or dead. That's all I know about him.
The Jew stopped to hear no more, but uttering a loud yell, twinning his hands in his hair, rushed from the room and from the house. And that is where we leave our adventure for today.
As I'm slowly dying.
Yeah, my voice is slowly starting to give out. So, thank you for joining us. Be safe, stay excellent, and keep reading, and see you next time. Bye for now.